It's another episode of Claris Talk AI. We have two special guests today, Alexis Allen and Matt Odell. Matt, you used to be in the Claris community and now you're back. So we have two design experts. So Chris and I were going to be peppering them with questions about a couple of very interesting impacts. Impacts? No. Sure. About AI and design. So how really kind of two different areas. Matt, you had a really good way of describing it a second ago. Tell us what that is.
Well, I think when it comes to design and I think there are two major topics that at least are kind of bubbling up in the design community these days. And one is obviously the concept of AI being a replacement for designers or AI
Mm.
as a way of generating design,
Hmm.
is probably a better way of putting it or more polite way of putting it at times. And then the other being around like, how do you as a designer actually design an interface for something
Okay.
that is built on AI and uses the different concepts of AI? And so I think those are kind of the two large topics that like we end up getting drawn into of like, what does it mean to be responsible when you're building something with AI?
Mm.
And then also, what are the moral implications and other things that happen when it comes to uh, generating designs via AI? So that's where I end up spending and reading the most
Yeah.
these days about those two.
Alexis, I'm kind of guessing that you and Matt sort of come at each of those two different angles. Am I right about that?
I think so. I think Matt is more of a general user experience designer. So I think that his applications are a bit more broad. I typically specialize right in FileMaker specifically. And so I may be using AI in a more targeted way than maybe Matt might. And so maybe that makes it more useful for somebody with Matt's set of tools or experience level. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I'm sure there's lots of AI applications for FileMaker specifically. In terms of design for FileMaker, we can talk about that a
Mm.
little bit as we go through and sort of see where it might be useful, where it might not be useful, where we might need to be a bit more critical of it, and so on.
Hmm.
I think that's a
Chris,
great
we haven't
point.
heard you yet.
Oh, yeah, it's a world record. Well, first, speaking to Alexis's great point there, as far as I know, I am unaware of any tools specifically for FileMaker design. Not to say that those won't emerge, but I think it's an interesting conversation. I mean, and I'm not dismissing the topic. This is a really important topic. I think what that means is in our community, we don't have an option yet to be able to not replace the design surface within FileMaker to create interfaces. We can certainly, I mean, you could look at like the web viewer as a extended design paradigm where you can embed a chat, and then like to FileMaker 21, they released like essentially an add-on for like a chat window that pops up. I really look forward to getting your guys' take on the chat window experience a little bit later in our discussion. But starting off with design tools, I thought I had this little thing I ran across. I'm just going to share it here. I thought it was just interesting fodder. So Alexis, you really framed it up really well. It's there's really designing for FileMaker, and then there's designing, right? And so,
Yeah.
and I think Matt, you can be the voice of the designing, and I don't really have my finger on the pulse of design. I'm a terrible designer. Matt knows this. We worked. By the way, I just want to say, two of the great minds in the Claris and FileMaker community. Alexis, absolutely the leader in the clubhouse. Nobody does it better. I mean, just absolutely bowing to the impact that you have on design. And I will say that that need is profound within the FileMaker community. There's no doubt about the impact on good design, and nobody is waving that flag better than Alexis. So we have links to your website, actually, just to let everybody know, Hyperspace Data Solutions, along with the FM Design University, which will wrap up with our plugs at the end and let you guys provide some context there. And Matt, of course, now at Capital One, which is very exciting, but a lot of people that are watching or listening to this probably remember you from the Claris world.
Oh
And
yeah.
I am excited to say that in between Claris and Capital One, we got to work together, and the impact that Matt has had has been profound within our organization. And literally every day, something that Matt brought to us and to our FileMaker software design process, it shows itself. So, and one of those
I,
big things is moving towards a more visual approach to defining requirements. So,
Yeah,
Matt, it's all you.
on that, I think like you bring up the idea of like, okay, well, there's FileMaker design and there's other design, but I think like one thing I tried to do when I was working with you and really getting my feet wet, really doing design as a job versus doing it as like a side hobby of stuff, was showing that like, it's one and the same, and that yes, there is like whatever place you're designing for, there should be some sort of knowledge of the medium that you're working
Mm.
in. And like, for example, when I came and joined Capital One, we have a lot of designers that work on web interfaces and fewer that have experience designing for native iOS and native Android. And that
Mm,
was a big thing for a while of like, how do we train up our staff and get people in certain places that have that native experience? Because what was happening was a lot of people were designing iOS interfaces and then like, well, I need an Android one. And then they would just like try to put an Android skin on it, but wouldn't know the paradigms of like, well, actually in material design, which is their design system, here's the things you're supposed to use. And so I think there's a thing there of like, yeah, we need to know a little bit about the medium. But that said, like I was still just using Adobe XD back in those days, not Figma, to create stuff that would eventually turn into FileMaker designs. And like the use of these AI tools like could similarly do that. If you said like, here's the design system I want you to use, like we create a design system in Figma or something, and then say like, here's I want you to create an interface using that. Like arguably it could do that. Now, granted, you still have to then build it in FileMaker,
right.
which is what we would have to do anyway. But at
Yep.
least like it was a way to be able to generate. You could technically generate it using these tools, but it's not, yeah, it's still a step away from where you
Yeah, I
need.
think that's a fascinating bridge, I think, between the two worlds that you introduced at the top of this. It's the thirst for any design tools would be for creating the wireframes for what the design is going to look like. Then you go in and use FileMaker tools, right? So, like for those that are watching on YouTube, I just found this thing from 2023 that says there's like a 1,700% interest in Google Trends on finding design tools. And now, specifically, those would be design tools that you create a wireframe that then you then hand to a FileMaker designer and say, bring this to life within the FileMaker paradigm. And to that point, Matt, you have to understand what FileMaker design surface layer can do, right?
Yeah.
Alexis, I would assume that's a really important part about approaching FileMaker design is understanding the platform's capabilities, right?
That's absolutely correct. And I think that the main drawback for some of these design tools that we have right now is that they are really geared towards web development. And so, in
Hmm.
theory, you can take these wireframes and then you can create a website out of them or a web app out of them. And so, that's the real draw, I think, for most people is that I can just sort of go, in theory, from a sketch to like a working app with a relatively small amount of effort. And whether you can or can't, I don't know. That's still an open question in my mind of whether that's really possible. That's the promise anyway. That's what they're kind of hoping will maybe one day get there. Um, as Matt was saying earlier, the drawback for us as FileMaker people is that we're going to be able to maybe do that, but then the last step, which is kind of here, click and just send this to the web, that's going to be something where we're going to have to actually create FileMaker layouts out of it. And that may be the part where if the AI tool is sort of geared towards web and it's assuming that the web is your platform, it might be giving you things that can't be done in FileMaker, for example, right? Or they're not easily done. So you have to be aware of those. And I guess that would be sort of my main caveat with a lot of these AI tools is that you still have to have some knowledge, actually quite a bit of knowledge, I would say, about design in order to evaluate whether what it's giving you is actually good. So yes, it can give you a result. It's like kind of like some of the photos, right? Like it can make a photo. Now, whether or not we judge that to be an accurate photo, whether the person has the right number of fingers, whether,
Yeah.
there's
Don't
lots
ask
of
for text to
things
begin
around
with
the
because it won't be readable. It won't actually be anything.
Right, right, exactly. So there's that caveat is that you still need to understand the domain. Like my son he's in engineering and he brought home a very complicated math textbook and it was like trellis coded something for applications. I don't know. I could read the title, right? It was in English. I could read the words, but I did not understand the words. So even if
Hmm.
AI were to give me, a digest of everything that is in that textbook, I would not have the ability to actually understand it or apply it. So I think that if you're approaching these tools with some level of design knowledge of your own, and then you're going in and saying, okay, I'm going to try and have this give me something, then perhaps you can then take that and it's a starting point. It's something that you can take and then go with. If, as Matt suggested, you're already starting with a framework, well, that's part of something that people struggle with in the first place is how do I create my framework? So, there's a lot of work to get there, and I think it can ease the transition, but I don't know that it's going to be sort of like a replacement. And I think maybe that's a fear of a lot of people, is that, oh, AI is going to replace my job. But I mean, now that we all have phones on our iPhones, well, we still have photographers. We still have
Yeah.
professional photographers with professional equipment that are going and doing things, right? So it's, yes, there's more photography out in the world. That doesn't mean that the specialists are not useful any longer, and that you don't need to know something when you're approaching that tool of how to use it. Does that make sense?
Hard yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
And sometimes the professionals are even using iPhones.
Yeah.
yeah, just to share my own personal philosophy on AI in general, it absolutely, Alexis, lines up with exactly what you've said. In the early years of building AI applications for business, the number one pushback was fear that people were not going to be needed, like humans will not be needed. So it became clear that we, as an organization, we had to have a philosophy about this. So the sort of somewhat kitschy way that I express this is we're not building robots to replace humans. We're building Iron Man suits to give these humans superpowers. And really that means we're just trying to create drafts of outputs. So whether it be marketing materials or actual written proposals or whatever, or insights for that matter, the emphasis is on this is a draft for you to go. Now we're trying to level you up or get you to like step 3 of 10, and then let the humans do what humans do well. And I think that philosophy applies, much like what you're saying, Alexis, to the design process, right? You can only really get so far before that design acumen is necessary.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we've started to hear also in the design community, and I think this is probably why there's a little bit of fear with like the generation side of things, is because in many cases when you're working with an organization or a team that has less of a design maturity, you end up becoming what like known as order takers, right? It's like
Mm.
I'm not doing the UX process. I'm not doing the double diamond as they call it or whatever. I'm not doing discovery and learning. I'm an order taker from a product team who is doing all of that work themselves and then say, here's the screen I want you to design, make it look pretty for me. And
Hmm.
then you're like, and that's when you have that level of work, it's not very fun. And then there's this fear of like, if that's how they see us as designers in
Mm.
many cases, and then we're like, well, now I have this other thing that just will do that for me. I can just tell it to do that thing. So what has been interesting is seeing like the people that I've seen that tend to go in that direction of leveraging those tools that aren't designers. It's like I'm not a designer, but I want to leverage that tool. Are the people that tend to have that mindset of what design work is.
Mm.
But design work is much more than that. And to your point of like where the designer can then come in, like a designer can even leverage that tool themselves, but where the real work comes in is in the research, is in understanding the problem you're trying to solve and understanding what is the content and what is the hierarchy of that content and how it plays together, creating an ERD of stuff or an object-oriented UX way of describing the world. And like having that is actually where like the work is. That's where the hard stuff is. And that in many cases, like learning general visual design things, at certain cases, like if I'm not trying to break new ground and create something really like fantastic and out there, but I'm just trying to make something generally look nice, yeah, there's, those paradigms have been solved. Like
Hmm.
people know what a general good looking thing is and what a good nice font is, and AI might be able to create that for some people. But and so that's where like it gets interesting, where it's like, well, yeah, the work is not this as much, or it can be
Hmm.
that, like if you really are trying to go for something, but like I just need a base level of it generally looking nice, but like I need to make sure it's solving the right problem and it has the right content and it's
Yeah, I
helping the
mean,
person through.
I don't know. I guess I still think we're really far away from what I perceive that we do as FileMaker developers, which is to find out what the application is actually supposed to do, whether
Exactly.
the users are telling you or not. Like understanding what their business is and understanding like what will make their business more successful and what will make their users happy. Um, I don't think that's not something I think you can get yet from like not even close, frankly.
Yeah.
Uh,
Is
But on that, I think like the interesting thing that these tools do give, and I haven't tested them enough to know if they'll be able to do this or not, is so much in learning if you're solving the problem the right way can be prototyping. Again, I gave
mm,
that FileMaker talk however many years ago about
right.
prototyping.
It's an
But
excellent talk.
like if prototyping is the thing of like it's one way of learning and like validating,
hmm,
like the ability to generate ideas and generate stuff quickly so that I can test it. is like an interesting way to be able to leverage that. Because again, I think there's a thing I had to get over when I got into design of like the idea of like just because you generated an idea doesn't mean it's a precious thing and you need to be willing to throw it away. And I
Hmm.
think there's also a bit of feeling of like, well, if I didn't generate it, if AI generates it for me, I feel easier to throw it away. But that kind of quick iteration of stuff could be useful.
I think the prototyping and ideation part of the role of AI is interesting. I'm not sure yet. Let me give you an example. Like we are all familiar with AI generating images, mostly what for the purposes of memes and sending images to our friends and having some fun with it. I don't know how much practical use case. Well, we think we found a practical use case with one of our client deployments where they basically have designers who are very skilled at creating product packaging designs and like marketing materials for print and online. And one of the challenges that they encountered was that when the potential customer comes in and tries to describe what it is that they're looking for, they then hand that to the human designers who go through multiple costly, right, just as far as like time overhead, the iterations to just establish where they start, like literally like the prototype or, like the starting point of the ideation discussion. So we inserted these tools. We didn't go with like a DALL-E type approach. We went more with like a stable diffusion version, which allows us to actually take old designer. We actually can train the model. Those are diffusion models where you start with an image or a collection
Hmm.
of images and then kind of change it from there rather than start from scratch. So it's not really text to design. And what we found was that approach does not create the final output. Like it's not even close to the final output. But what it does is it helps get their customers started, getting the idea from their brain into something that they can now like have a more tangible conversation with. And I wonder, is there like a world of that within
Hmm.
FileMaker layout prototyping, perhaps?
I mean, perhaps. I think the challenge always is going back to what Matt said is about like the research, right? So that's the part that the AI really isn't doing for you. It's not able to kind of talk to the people. And I mean, you're the person with it. So at the end of the day, you're the one with that knowledge that's inputting the prompts into the AI in the first place. So you're already doing some amount of synthesis, some amount of research,
Hmm.
some amount of work. And I think, yes, you're correct. I can foresee that AI could reduce some of that time spent potentially in giving you ideas, similar to like if you're writing an essay on something, maybe you're going to go into ChatGPT or you want to research something general topic, right? But those are just going to be starting points, and then you're going to dive in on your own more deeply to make sure you actually understand those things,
Mm.
presuming you're not plagiarizing
Hmm.
something. But you're going to want to understand all of those things more deeply. And obviously, for a client, it's going to be pretty obvious if you don't know what you're talking about, right? So you're going to want to understand and know and be selecting the right things. I played around with one of the tools, which was, I think it's called Wizard. It's got a weird type. It's UI Zerd. So, but I think
Yeah,
it's
Your
named
wizard.
Wizard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I asked it to give me like an invoicing app.
this one here.
Yeah. And it gave me something, but it was very different from what I would have chosen. And so I think the sort of potentially weak part of this is that it's derivative, right? It's based on what's already there. And so if you're designing in the way that it has been trained, then that's cool. And I think Cris, you were talking about, training it on your own material potentially, and then you have a bit more control, I think, that way, right? Because you're kind of controlling what's going in. A lot of these AI models, it's kind of obscure or opaque about what has actually gone into training it. So you're not really sure where it's getting this information, and that it may or may not be good. I don't know. And it probably depends on the model too. If you're training your own model, perhaps there's more potential there that it's going to be closer to what you want to do. But at the end of the day, you're still doing some work. So what work is this really taking away from you? Like what you have to think, I think, critically about how much is this time really saving me? So for myself, I didn't find that it saved a lot of time. Perhaps for somebody who is just starting out and they want to get an idea or they want to, get some just options, you like visual options for something new, maybe that could work. But then there's also lots and lots and lots of inspiration that's already out there, right? You can
Hmm.
go and just do an Google image search for screenshots and look at all kinds of things. So there's not just AI for that. You can use like the whole world, right? All of the software that's out there that's publicly available is available to you for inspiration. So, if you're not used to using Figma, perhaps I think it could be useful, but it doesn't take that much to learn Figma. So, I think you need to sort of critically evaluate whether it's going to work for you. And I think you, for example, found a specific situation where it works perfectly. And then I think those are the things you need to find and kind of go for those.
I think that's I think you nailed it there. And Odell, you actually know our process, and I
A
can
little
say
bit.
where I think it actually, I don't know how big of a deal it is, but where I think it actually fits in is we talk to customers, figure out what they want, sketch things out, then we turn those sketches. We were using, before Odell showed up, we were using Balsamic, and then you told us about Adobe XD. Now I can't believe you're talking about Adobe XD like it's like yesterday's news. I feel so far behind. But it really kind of moved us into what we were talking, and when we used to meet like every week and have these like concept discussions, and one of the things that Odell helped us with was going from a low fidelity UI design where the theory was no colors, no, fonts, no nothing, just have them focus on where everything is. And then Odell moved me off my mark into a higher fidelity where you're establishing an expectation of design. And that's where we switched from Balsamic that purposely had like these squiggly lines you were drawing on screen into like something that looked more like what the final product would look like. And we found that to be extremely successful. So I think maybe that might be the only place like a tool like this for those that are watching on YouTube. There's this part of the, I also don't know how to pronounce this. I think it's
It's just Wizard. It's just Wizard.
it's Wizard. Yeah, I'm
Wizard, yeah.
overthinking it. And
Spelled weird.
interesting. It's from Miro Labs, actually. I didn't even notice that the first time around. But on the screen, it actually takes a sketch and turns it into something. So maybe that one step where you have a sketch and you can take a picture of it and it turns it into maybe your starting point of a low fidelity wireframe. Maybe that's where something like this is useful. And I think they're the same. They're the same. Is this other one, this Galileo, by the way, it's the same kind of thing. So I don't, I think it's really interesting the point that Alexis made earlier about like, who's doing this? Is it somebody who doesn't know anything about design and they're just taking their not knowing the design principles and turning it into something pretty looking? Is it solving the problem just because it's not, squiggly line sketches and now it looks a little bit more robust? I don't know if that's progress, right? So I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's tough to say in this because I think like those that are experts in these tools of like Adobe XD and Figma, in many cases, yeah, I'll be honest, I switched to Figma just because my company switched to Figma, and it's
Oh,
like this
okay,
is the
good.
tool you
You
have to
already.
use, and so that's the tool I use. I do use a XD every now and again for myself, but yeah, these days for work I use Figma. But with that, like when you are an expert, like even seeing that example of like, oh, I have this sketch and then it turned into this thing, like, okay, I took a camera, how long did that save me? Like, I probably already had a template of something like that. I could have grabbed a
Yeah,
template of something
definitely.
like that.
That looked
Like
like a
it,
super basic web template to me. None of the stuff I just saw was at all impressive or not obvious. So
yeah,
maybe those weren't good
and
examples.
but also I think like the example that Alexis brings up there of like there there is this feeling a bit in the design space of like for so long we were focused on like improving uh improving outcomes and the amount of time it takes to like get something, and we're making these small incremental improvements and like realizing that like what, I think we've solved the shopping cart problem. Like we don't need to solve that again. And I think actually like my interpretation of that in like the file maker space is like I think we've solved the invoicing system. Like I think we've all built enough invoicing systems that it's like second nature to
Yeah,
all of us at this point. And so like
yeah.
there's that kind of stuff of like, okay, well just give me something going and like I have a base thing that I can work with. But again, most of us already have that because we've already done it. And so we already have something that's sitting right there that I can use as the base thing. And that's all that this is giving you. And so again, it might be useful for that new person who's like, well, I've never built an invoicing system before. Well, if I do have the model trained on that, that's a big caveat from what Alexis said there. The caveat, if I have that, I could, yeah, maybe generate something fairly quickly. But we'll see if it for those of us that are like mid-advanced users of this, it's not as useful,
Yeah,
at least right now. Yeah.
Chris and I have talked a lot about generating code with AI, which obviously is very good at. It's actually really good at coming up with data models.
Hmm.
It's really good at, all the things that aren't really particularly visual, but they're really, really useful tools as a developer. Alexis, you were also talking about like getting deeper into something, to really understand like what the customers think, so you don't show up at their place seeming dumb. I use AI to learn. I mean, that's like maybe my most exciting use of it is if I'm curious about something, to just have a long conversation about it. Um,
Yeah, I would even say that AI has made a huge impact for us in like we have like a trust-based selling approach where the very first time you talk to a potential customer, they're not really expecting you to be an expert in their industry or understand how, like, let's say FileMaker might specifically benefit their problem. And so usually in the sales process, you have this one conversation where they're forgiving that you don't know anything about them, but then every conversation after that, you need to be an expert, right? And so we found that just taking literally the original intake form and a little bit of research about the customer and feeding it into AI tools can help us then,
mm,
instead of being knowledgeable on the second phone call, we can be that knowledgeable on the first phone call. And there's these concept of trust-based selling where that little bit of additional trust, especially if they're bidding against other, potential vendors,
mm.
that can generally, move the trust back in your direction. So there's like little teeny little tweaks where that can help. And then certainly from a coding standpoint, I mean, on our non-FileMaker projects where it's all JavaScript and Python and code, it has a massive impact on productivity. Like we probably haven't had to hire additional people and still be able to grow in that area just because these tools allow us to actually do like multiples of a person hour of productivity on a given day. So,
Mhm.
but those are not design elements,
Yeah,
right? At
exactly.
all.
That's
So
kind of the point I was trying to make. I got a question for you guys. If knowing what we all know and having talked about what we did, what would be your like ideal set of tools to be able to use AI to design things for a customer?
That's a great question. Matt should go first because I don't
Uh,
know.
I don't know. I don't know if I know it either. I will admit in this conversation, it might have even come out in like our own podcast episode about some of these topics that like, and I think it's pretty safe to say, I think I'm the youngest person here, but I think I'm also turning into that. Like, I don't know if you guys reach that age where you're like, oh, I think I'm getting to that point where now I can be a grump on something.
Get
And I
off my
think
lawn.
exactly. I think AI
Yeah.
for me in many cases like is the place where I can be the grump of like I don't see the thing here. And like there are times I can I guess I give it its kudos to times where I'm like, yeah, I can see the benefit for some people there. It's not for me, and that's cool if you
Mm,
want to use it. But and like even recently at Capital One, we were talking to developers specifically about that, like using AI for coding purposes and like
mm,
bringing in things like GitHub Copilot and stuff like that.
mhm,
We were having these conversations and we were talking to some that were like, oh, this is great. I love it. We were talking to other people that are like so adamant of like everything that I've seen from other people on my team generated by GitHub Copilot is horrible and I have to redo all of their work and like this and that. Yeah. And so like you just get this weird swath of people that are like, do I trust it or do I not? And sometimes I have this feeling about it or I've seen bad outputs from it. And so now I'm turned off by it. So I know I'm not exactly answering your question, but I think I'm more on the side of that person that's like, I haven't seen the benefit for my own workflow yet.
So what is it? What do you use these tools for on a daily? Do you use them regularly for anything in your world?
At this point, no. I will say I have used Copilot a bit for um, because I will be honest, I was generating like vision work of like, hey, here's what a future experience could be like.
Hmm.
And in that future experience, I wanted to include something from like Copilot because I knew some people wanted it and I knew it was going to be a part of the thing. But I didn't want it to be vaporware. I didn't want it to feel like the example I was using was fake.
mm,
So I actually wrote code in
Mm,
GitHub or in like in Visual Code VS Studio, and I used Copilot to like generate stuff. And then I was like, I'm going to use this actually as the example in my vision work to prove that like it does this. And here's a real life example. And I'm not just like a lot of people, this happens in our design work of like you show something that's like cool and futuristic and people are like, you're just waving your hands. That doesn't exist. And I wanted to not do that. So I've used it for things like that. I will say I don't use it for work. I think I gave this example on our podcast, Alexis, of like for my band, I had a photo that we used for our like a digital photo that we used for our artwork, and then we had to come up with like a physical. We wanted to come up with a physical version of the artwork, but as you all know, if you've ever printed anything, you need a little bit of bleed area, and we literally used the edges of the photo for the photo, and it was taken by our bass player. And so I was like, I can't just send this along because if it gets printed, it's going to get cut weird. And so actually, I went into Photoshop, put the photo in, and then had it generate like more photo around the edges that I knew
Yeah.
would end up getting cut anyway, but just enough for bleed so that it wasn't messed up. But it basically generated a building, like because it was like a building look on the on this photo, and so it basically
Hmm.
generated some sky and a building around the edges, just so that like I could have the right proper bleed for printing something. So those are like
I
the,
saw a demo of that. Really cool. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it took me a while to like figure out the prompt and the right way to select the thing in Photoshop to like get it to work, but it worked. And again, it's good enough that like again, you don't see any of it in the work, but it was
Hmm.
good enough for me to give to a printer to print out the thing and give us our CDs. But
Is there not some sci-fi movie that inspires you of like tools you'd want? You know, like the Iron Man thing, man. I would totally love that. The Tony Stark inventing a
Yeah.
new molecule that his dad discovered or whatever. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I would, by the way, apply the Iron Man suit, like, concept or philosophy of AI, to coding as well too, right? So,
yeah,
like, Odell, when you said, managers or people in the QA process are getting just garbage code, the sense to me feels like there are some that use it as a tool to give them a starting point, and some that think they're done,
yeah,
right? So I think if I brought it into like FileMaker scripting, I would say that the role for AI, when it starts to recognize FileMaker becomes a tool in that area, would be not in saying I need a script to do this, do the whole script, and then just say ship it. It would be
Mm,
like the approach where you put a bunch of comments in first and then you build your script around it. I would say maybe it can go a couple steps past that, where it puts your comments in, figures out what you need to accomplish, what you have available to you within the FileMaker scripting paradigm, and gives you a starting point to literally just start testing this and tweaking it and
mhm.
customizing it for what your need is. And I think that's an important step, especially when just humans, you don't know where they're at in their day. Am I like, low blood sugar, not caffeinated? I'm not feeling like doing this right now, but I got to get it done by the end of the day. Is this inspired work? Well, maybe that little step of just getting me from a blank page to something that I can start editing. I mean, that's how it works for my
Mm.
brain.
yeah.
Can actually make me productive and just get back into that, that realm of inspired work. Whereas before I might still be staring at the blank page. So, I think maybe it applies there too. Um, so yeah, and this is the two of your opinions on this is like means everything to me, and I believe I can speak for Navarre here as well too. And then at the beginning of this discussion, Odell, you mentioned that there's really two ways to look at this. So we looked at is there room for these tools to generate design elements, and I think we've landed on what we're seeing right now, not so much. And there really are these like soft elements of what designers do that are so important to the process. I mean, we talked a lot about UI, but I guess I would summarize it by saying UI tools would give you UI by ignoring UX.
Yeah.
And I don't know how
Yikes.
beneficial that would be.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so I would then I'm really interested to get your both of your opinions on sort of the other way that we're going to look at UI, right? Like the actual UI of an AI application. And I think a
Mm,
fascinating thought experiment for
mm-hmm.
me. I don't have any of the answers. I just have questions, and that's why I was so excited to have you guys come here. But the we don't have a lot of AI applications that we can sort of all point to and say, yeah, we've all seen that, and that's what that interface looks like, and how would we improve upon that?
Mm-hmm.
But there is one, actually. There is one, and it's ChatGPT. I'm not saying it's the end all of user interfaces, but I think, if we really step back and think about this, so it was November 28th, 2022. So here we are in 2024, not quite 2 years ago that this whole concept got in front of end users, right? We're not talking about like, the AI models themselves. We're talking about this like chatting with, this interaction. And chatting is not a new concept, but when it went from 0 to 100 million users faster than any application in the history of technology ever did, and it has now doubled that and potentially even more. It's grown so fast that OpenAI doesn't want to say how fast it's growing. They've realized the commodity that they have here. But what it has done has introduced a universal interface to information, and Navarre knows this. I don't think the power of AI for business is as a question answering tool. I think that is a fool's errand. I think it is getting your data as the thing that you're conversing with from a business standpoint. So assuming it, even with that use case, this is still the interface paradigm. For those that are watching, I presented a little bit of a visual here, but for those that are listening, it's imagine in your mind the ChatGPT, interface where you have the input mechanism on the bottom, the response or the conversation on the top, and then to some degree over on the left-hand side, you see some history. So, and to frame this up a little bit, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It's just like wow, this amazing time like in user interface. And then just recently, before we're done with the topic, there has been a slight update to this that I look forward to getting your opinions on. But first, like this UI paradigm that has become ubiquitous in the hundreds of millions of users interactions and on a daily basis, what are we looking at, and what does this mean, and where do we go from here even?
Well, it's basically master detail, right? It's just a very simple.
Oh my God, you're right.
That's all it is.
With an input mechanism.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I don't know if I
thought.
agree with you there, Alexis. Because
Okay.
with master detail, the information on
I
the
do.
left is something that you really regularly look at. Like if that was a list of clients, you'd be really heavily interacting with it.
Right.
But
But if we're talking about strictly a design pattern,
yeah,
you've got a bunch of, a list on the left. And when
yeah,
you click on it, you see the detail on the right. That's a
right.
master detail.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in fairness, like though, like if you were one that managed your conversations in a like like you're applying some like concept or theory to it, those would be things that you want to recall. Like they don't just go away and disappear.
Right.
Like you might want to recall this conversation about this product that you have, and you
Yeah,
bring
I
that
just think
back
it's
up.
those
So
are
in that
really,
regard.
really rarely interacted with. But then you can also
Yeah.
hide that
Agreed.
thing. Yeah.
And
But
I think
really the top and the bottom are really where you're working. Which what in a master detail is really what you would do anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the side just being the navigation elements,
Yeah.
but I think to the point of like if all of those individual chats in the list have context and you're saving
Mhm.
the state and context between times that you're going back to it, like thinking of that as like or similar to your chat or your like messages app or WhatsApp or whatever that you're using, right? So
Mhm.
you have that list of stuff, each of them with different people, different contexts, different conversations happening. So that I understand. Like I think actually, so I'm going to reference. I haven't read all of this yet. I read most of her work, but I haven't gotten around to finishing this yet. But there's a book called Conversational Design by Erica Hall from Mule Design. It
Ooh.
is for free. You can go
Hmm.
and get it from Mule Design's website. It's part of like a book apart series. But it is fantastic. But I think that her way of approaching this is actually not like it's not specific to AI and this type of chat interface, but it's based around the concept of, the quote unquote first interface us as humans had was conversation, right? Was talking to each other before we had any kind of other kind of interfaces for interacting with each other.
Hmm.
Before writing, we talked to each other, right? And so this idea of like a back and forth is kind of useful and like
Mhm.
something that's innate to us as humans. And actually, a lot of the work that we've been doing as digital developers and designers is like getting away from conversation into more of like input and these very specific forms and parts where I'm working with data and filling in the exact things that I need to give. It's not a conversation anymore as much as it is like a one way, just tell me what you need me to know. And so the way she was approaching the book was like, what can we learn from how conversation and the paradigms of conversation, and how can we apply that to build better interfaces overall? And then I think from that you can also learn again potentially where even these chat GPT things are doing well and maybe not even doing so well and need to improve themselves in terms of like what a real conversation is. But it's a very interesting book. I definitely recommend going and checking that out.
That's
I think
brilliant.
I think they were smart to just start simple. And this is a brand new tool that nobody's ever used before. And if you think about Google search, with just an empty screen with an input box in it, essentially this is that with a addition of a list on the side and some, settings and different things, options on the bottom of that, still a sidebar. So, this might get more sophisticated in the future. Perhaps there's going to be all kinds of widgets, but people need to be trained on that as well. Like, so I think that they're not exactly sure. I mean, nobody's sure really how this is going to evolve in the future. And so I think there's a smart thing happening, which is let's just keep it very simple. People understand, as Matt said, people understand conversations. We're gonna, it's also novel to have a conversation that seems relatively, it's not canned, right? It's not a pre-planned responses. So that's really cool for a lot of people to be able to sort of talk about anything and get something that seems like real back. And so it's a very simple thing that we can all sort of, the entry is really easy. And then I think as time goes on, we're going to start seeing different ways that people are going to be applying the concept, and maybe different tools that may not be using such a simple thing. Like, for example, I have an AI language learning app called JumpSpeak, and it does glitch quite a bit. So I don't think it's 100% great, but you can have a conversation with it, and it has, a bunch of different options. Choose your language and choose what kind of conversation you want to have. And so there's, in the background, it's all ChatGPT. So just using an API to send the prompt to the ChatGPT model and get the answer back and display it to you. But it's different. Like, the context is made by the app. And so you, as the user, interacting with the app for one very specific purpose. And then all of your, the app is built around, achieving that goal of having a conversation or doing training or whatever. So I think maybe that's what we're going to see, is that the main ChatGPT, if you want to interact directly with it, it's going to maybe stay simple with a few little options, but then third parties are going to start building applications. And then maybe that's what Matt wants to talk about as well, is how do we do that? Like, what do those apps look like when the apps themselves are actually interacting with ChatGPT and you, the user, are interacting with the app, and it's that intermediary for you?
Yeah, I think the idea of it not being conversational and potentially being an input was one of the evolutions that I feel like I've seen. It was all about conversation, and then sometimes you just want to say, give me this thing. For example, like, I want to see well, let me actually do
this.
this.
Is a really good screen you've got up here, right? Because this is the different UI than that. This is basically creating a UI on the right, rather than just showing you text results that you can then sculpt, presumably. Yeah.
That's correct. And so for those that are listening to us, if you use Claude, which is it's an alternative, it's Anthropic's alternative to ChatGPT. Just recently, they came out with what I think is the only update in all of this time to this whole chat AI experience, and this is called Artifacts. So what we're actually looking at here, now we still get this, so we've got a drawer over here, and Odell, I can't make it through an entire conversation without saying, instead of a hamburger menu, for example, I'm sorry, I just had to bring an inside joke to the conversation. Matt Odell does not like hamburger menus. He's the whole will. But we have a drawer instead, right? So we still have that, that list concept. So the detail now is twofold. So it actually went to a two-column design. I still have my chat here, but what the Anthropic folks did, and I'm still getting used to this because this only came out a couple of weeks ago as of the recording of this. What I was asking it to do was generate some code. And so normally what would happen in the chat is it would insert like the code in the middle of my chat conversation, which honestly is very messy and just long form, and it's not visually intuitive by any means. So what it does is it recognizes when there's things that might need to be moved off into its own screen, and it does so. And then in the case of writing code, it also gives me a preview mode, which technically could be a third column, right, from an interactive standpoint, and it combined those two together. And now I'm able to preview what I want, right? So that way I'm not interrupting the user with the code or the preview itself. And I can have this kind of interactive concept. like I can just tell it, I can do in this case, I think what I'm doing now instead of chatting is inputting. So on here, I'm going to
Hmm.
say, I don't need upcoming tasks, for example, right? And now what it knows to go generate additional code. And then, it should update what we're seeing on the left-hand side. So there it generated some new code. And then, for those that are listening, we're just seeing a bunch of code being written right now. And then when it's done, it'll switch over into preview mode. So I think this is actually pretty cool from
Yeah.
just and by the way, it's not, I know we talked a lot about design tools for UI. That was the thing I decided to come up with. But really what this is like if you're writing a document, like you want to update your vendor contracts, it'll show you the contract that you're talking about on the right. So you don't have to keep scrolling up for versions. You can just kind of navigate through the different versions. It's showing you whatever your latest draft is on the right-hand side. And then when you're done, you can just copy that contents and like my philosophy is start editing it, not, ship it
Yeah.
from there. So,
Well, this is kind of like Dolly when you ask for an image and then you ask for
mhm.
change, right? Like
Yep.
and it's not that good. This would be like, oh, okay, well, like we're looking at a CRM dashboard. We've got a hamburger menu with some stuff over on the left. You could say things like, where is the optimal placement of a button for a user that does X task in this interface?
Or if you've already done the research because you're experts in it,
Hmm.
you feed that in and see what the impact could be. And again,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense. I mean, I don't think it's consistent with how I feel about this and how us collectively in our discussion feel about this. I probably shouldn't have used an example of a wireframe for business software. This could be a document that you're creating,
Hmm.
or really what I think the important way to use AI for business is to communicate with your proprietary data. I cannot say that enough. I do not think there is a place for question answer machines like ChatGPT just to act as a
You,
knowledge
you
source.
did just see that OpenAI released Search GPT, which is your
Yes.
question answer machine.
Well, no, it's a search machine is what it is. It's actually searching the web and bringing back, more intelligent and non-ad driven results. So
Hmm.
what they're really trying to do is kill ad driven results there from a web browsing standpoint. But for me, don't get me wrong, I ask questions of ChatGPT all the time. As a matter of fact, my wife will appreciate me mentioning this, that I learned that you should not use fabric softener on towels because it makes them less absorbent. And I thought my whole
Yep.
life that it made them fluffier. And she said, no, that's not right. And in the middle of the store
Yeah.
down the grocery aisle, I asked ChatGPT and it proved me wrong. And so I'm letting her know, I'm telling as many people as I can that I was wrong. And so in that case, the question answer machine works. I'm saying for business, I don't care what ChatGPT knows. I just care about what my business data knows. And in that regard, I might even suggest that the benefit, and I really am interested in what you guys think about this. I'll put a little visual for those that are following us online. But what about a more ephemeral UI approach to the interactive experience? Let me just show something on screen, which
Yeah,
is,
while you're doing that, Alexis, I want to get your
here you go.
your feedback on the interface we just saw. Was that like an
Oh yeah,
evolution of
please.
more designy? Did you
I
like it?
mean, yeah, I mean it's fine. I think the question though is that you are selecting what you're going to be putting up on the screen. So if that's fits with your vision, then it's not bad. Like it was sort of black and white. It was very simple. It looked very functional, but I don't think there was anything inherently wrong with it. Now, the question really is like there's always this kind of overlap between UI and UX, right? And so
Hmm.
it's really hard for people sometimes, and even for me, to separate UI from UX. So what I'm seeing on the screen is partly the UX in terms of like what is there, where it's placed, what the purpose of it is, and then there's the UI of like how does it look. And
Hmm.
so from a UI perspective, it seemed fine. There was lots of white space, there was some hierarchy with the groups.
Hmm.
There was like some panels. It seemed from a UI perspective to be acceptable. It depends if you're looking for something that's just very bare bones and it fits with your product, then sure, you could use that. Would I personally use it? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It depends really on who you are and what you want to achieve. But certainly there's nothing wrong with that. And it depends how much variety you're looking for and, what does the end client want, and
Mm-hmm.
how many branding elements do you want to put in there. It certainly looked okay. Whether or not it was good UX, that's a different question, I think, because we don't
Well,
know.
I mean,
Yeah, I
like,
think
I guess I saw it as a tool where you could have a conversation with it, and you could say, ask it a question. You could say, no, that's awful. Make this column wider. Do that. It's basically kind of, a little bit of
But then
sci-fi movie-ish
why wouldn't you just use your mouse to do that?
because it might be vastly faster than you could do it with your mouse.
Maybe. I mean, maybe you like personally,
Ouch.
I probably
You nailed it.
I'm pretty fast, but yeah.
I have to say I apologize for using the example. I keyed that up before we even started talking here about like creating an interface, right? So
Oh,
I
it's
want to
okay. It's a
say,
good discussion. It's a good
yeah,
discussion.
no, but I think that I agree strongly with both of you that I don't think this is ready for that type of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
let's put it
yeah.
this way: if I was paying somebody $200 an hour and that's what they gave me, they're fired on Monday morning, basically. So I think that's probably the best way to put it. The last topic I'll do to
well,
kind of wrap.
actually, can
Oh,
I
go
want
ahead,
to I want to come back to one
please.
thing on this, which actually this is an interesting thing that I was thinking about as it comes to like some of these generation tools and like even seeing your use of that and like where I could see myself using that of for many of us, there tends to be a gap somewhere in our skills of like whatever the thing is, we do this thing really well, but we maybe don't do this thing really well. So,
Mhm.
for example, maybe you're like, well, you know what? I'm not so good with color theory, and like I need someone. I'm gonna hire a Matt Petrowski to make me a theme for something, right?
Mhm.
Like I
Mhm.
can't
Or an
do that.
Alexis Allen.
Or an Alexis Allen.
Thank
That's for
you.
these, yeah. But like, I need help over there. And like, again, I think the promise for a lot of these tools is like, well, I know enough to have good taste to be able to see if I like something or not. And so, like, maybe this thing can generate enough ideas for me. And like, I can take that time. And for you, the time is worth it, like you were doing in that interface of like, or for me, I haven't coded in a while. I don't really know all of the ins and outs of React. I need to create, there's a React interface that looked like I
Yep.
need to create a React interface. All right, give me the code for that. Yeah, you know what? That would take me forever to write that. And so maybe, yes, that would get me further because I'm not doing that in a day-to-day basis anymore. But like,
Yeah.
but yeah, for the to Alexis's example there, I'm like, yeah, but if I needed to just change it in Figma or something, like,
Just
yeah,
change it in Figma.
I
Yeah.
could just for me, we could just
Yeah.
do that. But for other people, maybe not so much. Oh, it's really, it's like
Well, I
it's
mean, that
that
was a simple example.
gap filler.
I'm asking about where it's going, right? That was
But
kind of what I
but
was
I just
trying
mean
to
it as
get.
in like it's for us like I guess the promise of the tool being it's that gap filler, right? Of like we
Hmm.
have this knowledge, I'm really good with this, but I'm not so good with this. Can this thing do that faster than I could with no knowledge of how to do that or a bare minimum of knowledge to do that? It seems like that's where a lot of these tools are gaining popularity.
I think that's well
I mean,
put.
I'm
And
thinking far future. I would say like this is something that I don't think you guys could do anywhere as fast as a computer could do it. Um, I would say like here's a PDF of every single screen in my application. The customer is adding a new department that's going to be using FileMaker. This is what the department does. Create screens that would synthesize all the data that would be significant, that would be useful for that department, and show me what those are going to be. And the first example wouldn't be that great, but it'd be way faster than what you could do, and way better than what you could do because it would understand every single layout, including all the ones that you didn't build, and all the other scripts and all the other code. That's where it's going. That's what excites me when we just saw that little thing. Not just, make a template screen.
But
Those
what's the
that's
meaning
what
of synthesize? That's the problem.
hmm,
Like when you say synthesize, that maybe mean something to you. Is that what the
that's a
tool is
big
going to
part.
mean?
well,
Like,
that's I think what ChatGPT, that's what these tools do amazingly well.
well, I think it depends on what your output is. I think with code, I agree with you because you're giving it a very sort of defined parameters. Let's say, I think Chris was saying you to put in your comments and you kind of tell it, but you've
Mhm,
already designed an experience at that point, right?
mhm.
You've
Right.
already said,
Yes.
oh, I have a screen and I want it to do this and I want it to work
Mhm.
in such and
You've
such a
done the
way because
work.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
You're just
Exactly.
executing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So,
I agree.
so I think the problem is by the time you give it all of these, like, I want it to be like this and with that, and you set out all the parameters, by the time you do all that and then evaluate whether or not the input you got is correct, matches what you're looking for. Like, I don't know, maybe the thing is, I don't want to shoot you down because maybe you're right and
Yeah.
I'm wrong. I have no idea.
No, I
Maybe
guess
that'll happen, but
I think about some
I see
other
that as a
examples.
problem.
Some
Yeah.
stuff I was trying to do, like learning to speak Greek, and then recognizing how it's structured totally differently. If I ask a synthesis type of a question, like, oh, another word I love, taxi. Taxidi is a Greek word for travel, and that's where the word for taxi came from. I wanted to know what was the root of taxi cab and travel in the top, say, 30 languages spoken in the Western Hemisphere, and see how many of them came from Greek and what other sources came and when was it from and what was the original word and was it, Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European, that's totally synthesis. That's not question answer machine. And that was one of the first examples that I did with ChatGPT that made me really recognize the power. And it can do all kinds of other things like that. I don't think I'm just um, it's really hard to translate that to something useful as a FileMaker developer.
Well,
I mean, it's
let
really, really
me
hard.
let me
But
suggest as a way to look at different use cases with that and purely focusing on synthesis. And I can't wait to hear Alexis and Odell. And I'm using your last names on purpose, of course. I'm trying to be respectful
call
to
her
the
Alan
Matts.
then.
This is what it was like being on the Matt and Matt podcast
Yeah.
before with Petrowski. But so the sort of bring it on home. And for those that are watching on YouTube, I'm going to show something on screen, but I'm going to talk through what this is. Now, this is the other side of this. Instead of AI as a creation tool, a generation tool for UI, now we're talking about the experience, the user experience of interacting with AI, right? So what we're looking at here, and it's really just 20 seconds, I'm going to talk through it, is a conversational piece. It's very much that list detail where on the list we're actually having assistance and chat history and feedback. But what's happening in the middle is, I think, what's really important here. So this is specifically talking to FileMaker data. This is a raw data table, and the user is asking questions. And what's actually coming back is not just answers, but data sets is how it ends here. But the thing I really want to focus on is it comes back with a visualization for those that are listening to us, a pretty sophisticated visualization that shows, training over the course of a certain month. And then below that, it creates what is essentially a report, kind of a sub-summary with some observations and narratives and the synthesis of this, to speak to Navar's point of, well, what does this all mean? And just to let you guys know what's happening in the background is the user of the system has been loaded into this. So it knows what role they play with the organization, what data they have access to, what's meaningful to them, what questions they've asked in the past, and what they've determined as being meaningful as well. So it's way beyond question answering. It's actually an interface to data. So to bring this into the FileMaker, I'll give my spiel, and then I want to hear what the design experts have to say about this because I've been waiting so long to hear this. And my thought is, when I first started seeing experiences like this, my reaction was, oh my God, the hubris that I've had all these years of talking to my users about what chart they want me to, or by the way, Navar, this is a trigger between you and I, dashboards, right? Like I wanted to create a dashboard. I want to design what all the charts are going to look like, what all the interfaces is going to look like, what all information that's going to be on screen, all the calculations and what they're deriving from it. I'm making those decisions and then we're delivering it. We're doing our best. We're talking to the users and figuring out what they need, but then we deliver it to them and they could use this thing for 5-10 years. And the hubris, my reaction was, I had so much hubris thinking that that's going to still be meaningful to them 10 years from now, or that's going
you
to be
ask
meaningful to
them what
every
their
user.
KPIs are, and they tell you,
Sure. Yeah. Well, right. So the point is, what if every user could have a report generated based on what they find useful, so that every single this is a concept of like ephemeral UI, right? Like every user gets a dynamic response to the data that they interact with that isn't the same that everybody looks at,
right?
And it can be trained on what that person finds useful. That's the concept
It
from a
can't just be
user
a
experience
report, right? The
standpoint.
dashboard has to be
Correct.
meaningful, actual, actionable, and
With
visual.
with
And this is only one of
synthesis.
those.
Yeah, with the synthesis, right? So in this case, what it actually did is looked at a bunch of historical training data, and then it actually came up with a training plan to improve these towards the KPIs of the user. So this, as a user experience design professionals, this is not a baited question. I really want to know is that what design people think of this type of experience and what this means to like our FileMaker, in UI.
It's where
Alexis,
this
you
is
go first.
going.
Okay, I'll go first. Um,
Please.
so I like the visualization a lot. I think that what's nice about it is that like building charts and things is one of my least, and reports is probably one of my least favorite tasks.
Amen.
Like we want to work on the fun stuff, which is like, making people have less, you know, sort of time wasting tasks in their day, right? And reports kind of at the end. I mean, they're important. They're for business purposes, they're super important, but they're not the most exciting thing to work on from a development perspective.
Mhm.
And I think this is really helpful because you've got something that is kind of relatively difficult to do
Mhm.
in FileMaker natively, and you can use, I'm assuming it's using some sort of Java uh,
It's
visualization chart in the
yeah,
background.
kind of some Python libraries are
Right.
generating these as well too, and some JavaScript as well. Yep.
Right. So minimum of coding, I assume you're loading in the module that does this and then
Yeah.
away it goes, right?
Yeah.
So and also it kind of takes away the situation where you're like, oh, I need this one more report and you have to create it
Mm.
potentially, especially when it's not something that they
Mhm.
necessarily know they're going to use again. So I kind of like it from that perspective. The key observations, that's interesting. Or if you go down a bit, I think there's more
Yeah.
kind of like focus areas, like sort of the narrative training plan.
Mhm.
To me, I don't know how practical that would be. If somebody really knows their business, they might have their own ideas. So perhaps this is good for a high level. That I
Mhm.
can't say. The part that feel personally would be more interesting and easy would be that kind of ephemeral reporting where I
Mhm.
don't have to build a whole module to report. I can perhaps have a tool that can kind of build whatever report they want in whatever format they want on the fly with a lot less work. That would seem to me to be something that I could see using. But I like this idea of it's not just general information. You kind of know what the input is. So it's like good information that you're starting with in the area. And I think somebody already mentioned the KPIs are already kind of set out. So it's not just like a vast treasure trove of undifferentiated information. It's already curated. So you already have some directional, some direction to go. And
Mhm.
it's not just kind of like you let it decide what it's important to me. Like I already have told it kind
Mm.
of what I want to see. And and then I can kind of give it an idea of how I want to see that because different information, you might want to see it as a bar chart or a pie chart or a graph or whatever, right? So there's that potential for doing that. The observation stuff, I mean, maybe is helpful, but I guess it would depend on what was put in. And if you had enough expertise to put that in the first place, then wouldn't you be able to do that from the numbers yourself? I don't know. That's
Yeah.
kind of where
Yeah,
I
and,
stand.
and just to be clear, like if you're just leaving it at its own devices for observations, I don't think that's going to get anything meaningful. To your point, Alexis, I agree with you very much there. In this particular case, the goals of this user within their organization against this data were built in. So like they
Yeah.
literally have expressed like these are our
Mhm.
KPIs. This so I think if you don't take that last step, I don't know how meaningful this would be, right? To your point. Like it's just kind of guessing. But if you do take that
Yeah.
step, this could be significant.
And
Odell,
take the
your
step for
thoughts?
every user, right? So like if
Well, and
every
that's the
user had
important
their
part.
own little preferences of what they wanted to see on theirs,
Correct.
and this isn't dashboardy at all, in my opinion,
Okay. Well,
because
I'm
Yeah.
not saying it is. I'm saying there's
yeah,
no use for dashboards if you can just do this
no,
with
no,
your.
no. The dashboard has to have. Well,
I'm
I don't know.
picking a scab here.
I'm teaching a class on dashboards in a couple days. Um,
Oh, I'm sorry.
uh,
Every time I say that, you're teaching a class like the next day, so I won't bring it
yeah,
up
it
again.
doesn't
I
matter. It doesn't matter.
apologize.
So, in my opinion, a dashboard has to be three things. I don't want to get off my. And actionable is a really important
Yoga
one. And
ball.
this is not actionable. So this is visual and it's probably meaningful. It's not particularly visual and it's not particularly meaningful because it doesn't really give you, it gives you a chart that's useless. All of the
Well,
lines go
it
up
might be
around the same.
useful. I mean, presumably we don't know what these mean, right?
Right.
These lines might be useful.
Yeah, I mean, why
Yeah.
would you assume that this chart is useless, but the chart you put on your dashboard isn't?
No. Well, this particular chart shows 5 lines, all going up
Hmm.
the same in a completely a straight line slope over time. And all of
Yeah.
the 4 people are doing the exact same work, and there's nothing useful or meaningful about it.
They're supposed to be doing this work. If they
Great.
weren't, one of them would be trailing off to the end, and you could identify who that user
So I
was
guess there's
by the chart.
utility in that at a glance. But
I get
yeah.
then I think for listeners, we should define what your dashboards look like. So they don't have charts.
Well, they
Um,
can.
oh,
It really depends upon what they need to be. But it should be like kind of a resting place where you come back. It's got living data and you don't have to think about it. So if other people are doing, like in a FileMaker database, stuff changes on a daily basis, or you have tasks that you do, you have a job. It should be relevant to what you do.
Yep, that's
And when you
exactly
come
what this
back
is.
to it, whenever you're done with whatever tasks you're on, you come back to it. It's not a main menu with buttons. And AI can really, really help with that. But I don't think this is that. I think this is a report. But I,
Yeah,
but
Oh,
I do.
sure.
I'm with you on report, but I'll the example I'll give from like my own background, and actually I'm going to correct one thing Chris said at the very beginning of this. I had
Uh-oh.
in between Claris and then Capital One, I did work for Udemy for a tiny bit of time.
Oh, yes, of
And,
course. I'm
and
so
in that
sorry
tiny
about
bit,
that.
no, it's fine, just messing with you. In that tiny bit of time, actually, one of the interesting things in working there was that, like, I remember joining this web-based experience company, and then they were like, "Yeah, we have all of the data for everything that's happening on our website in Redshift, which is just a version of PostgreSQL. Like everyone in the company can access, and if you want to write dashboards or SQL queries or whatever to pull the data to figure out stuff, more power to you," which was great for people like me who actually was a SQL certified developer, but for the vast majority of other people at the company, other than our software engineers, did not know how to write SQL. And so we ended up, and then we got a dashboarding tool that was like one of those like drag and drop dashboarding things called
Mhm.
Chartio. Great, loved it. It's fantastic. But it was this thing where, yeah, people would develop their own dashboards. And to Matt's point, like it had the information I needed to get the things done I wanted to get done, and we could all develop our own. But there were times where you had that need for someone's like, I do have that question I want to ask. And actually, this is the thing where I'm going to have my own like pedantic argument about like, I know you're saying this is synthesis and not like question answer, but for the person using this, it still seems like question answer. I asked a question, you gave me a series of answers, but like in that case, like I could imagine that person being like, I have a question about our data that I would like an answer to. I don't know how to write the right SQL query to get that to happen or have a visual. And so
Mhm.
I could see this as, yeah, as a report, one time, or like, again, I might run it multiple times. Like, hey, do that again. Show me that again. Like, I want to see an updated version of that. But it's probably, to Chris's point, yeah, more ephemeral. It's coming, it's going. A lot of people do have that as part of their work of like, I just need to run a report real quick, and then I need to get out, and I'm not going to think about it again. But it's, yeah, serves different purposes. But both could be useful.
I would add one additional layer. So when a user, by the way, this is a great clarification there, Odell. I like that a lot. And so I would say that when a user is looking at, and I'm not picking on dashboard just for the sake of that's what we're talking about. When somebody is presented information, they're then supposed to use their knowledge and context to say, okay, now what do I do with this information?
Mhm.
What's actionable about this? Where do I go with this? What is my plan moving forward? So all of that logic of who, just to be clear, it's really important to understand that that is actually should be. I'm not bragging about this. I'm saying if you're not doing that, then I don't know how much value there is. I agree with everything you guys have said. But if you're actually going in and saying, who is this person? Let me write a multi-page persona description of who they are, what data they have access to, what their job role is, what their goals are on a daily, weekly, quarterly, yearly basis. What interaction do they have to the data? What data access do they have? And then you're actually logging all the questions that they've been asking of this data over a period of time and remodeling that back into what's meaningful to them. Then applying that to the answer, that can be really meaningful. But if you're not doing that, I'm not so sure you're doing anything but question answer. So I guess what my advice to people listening slash watching would be is that you need to take that extremely important step. And if you do, you can you can leap over the dashboard thing. You can say, here's all my data. These are the things I need to do with the data. You know me. Tell me some examples of things that I can do with this, or where do I go from here? And that can be really profound if done correctly. If not done at all, I think it's mostly useless. So to kind of tie all those together.
Well, I think you're actually getting to like, this isn't a specific comment to this interface, because I think I could see the positives of it. Again, I know that example from where I used to work, where I could imagine people leveraging something like this for those kind of questions that they have. But I
Yep.
think like the same comment I have against this is probably the same comment that comes up in many cases against ChatGPT and these types of tools, which is and actually is one of the like themes or maxims of like what makes good conversational design. So I'm going back to that book from Erica Hall around quality or truthfulness. And I think where the struggle is currently, and not that we can't get past it, but the problem that I'm seeing currently is around, is the content I'm getting back truthful? And like how much do I trust it or not? And like we're seeing enough examples of like things that are being generated that it's like that's completely not true. That is objectively false of something you were telling me. And not that like, hey, if I'm feeding it my own data, you'd think like, oh, well, then that needs to be a source of truth. But I think we've all been there before where us ourselves have accidentally wrote a script to find records to run a report. And then that report that we've generated is actually not truthful because we forgot, oh, I needed to not include these records, but I
Mhm.
have to include these other ones and like things like that. And the fact that like I don't see any of that here, I don't see what's happening behind the scenes, gives me a little bit of like mistrust of how truthful is the things I'm seeing and what do I have to do to check it? And I'm sure you could get there. I think that that's to me seems to be one of the major, like the next major hurdle to overcome with some of this stuff is like I can't judge the quality. And I don't know if there's even places where people are doing a really good job of like ensuring and like telling the systems, hey, this is bad. Like, how is that happening? So that's
Yeah,
my current feeling on some of it.
well,
Like it could get there, but I don't trust it yet.
that is incredibly validating for you to say that because what is actually happening, first of all, I agree. I just really think it's important for people to understand what not to do, what you should be doing, when you can trust. Trust is probably the number one word that I use in all my presentations and discussions about AI and how people should not trust ChatGPT. Just you shouldn't. You should be,
Yeah.
wary of what you're getting back. And then when you bring in your own data and turn off access to ChatGPT's knowledge set, you should be able to trust your data. But what we have found is that most of the development in our AI systems goes exactly towards the trust factor. How do I determine that this conversation stays within context of my data? How do I prove that it's actually true against the data? What aspects can we do? We actually have like semantic scoring elements on the back end that are constantly doing the pulse check on accuracy. If you're not doing those things, you shouldn't be drawing any conclusions. Like, if you're not doing those things, you shouldn't leap over the dashboard into what do I do from here? You absolutely have to do those elements. So what I can tell you is there are methodologies to do this. It's a bit of our secret sauce here on the tools that we're creating. I don't know how forthright I'll be with peeling back the curtain on those things, but they are so critical. If you're not doing that, you should not trust the applications that you're working with. And I think that's a really, really, really important message for people listening and watching to take away. So I appreciate you bringing that up. It makes a ton of sense. What a great way to put a bow on this. I
For the
think,
first hour. Yeah, that's
yeah,
we
we
can
should
really get
Part
into.
one.
take take a moment to give everybody a chance to do some plugs here. We're going to put in, by the way, I was just adding the Erica Hall book to the show notes.
Good.
I want people to check that out. I'm going to be checking that out myself. Let's start with you, Alexis. What do you got coming up and things you want people to know about?
Well, I'm doing a lot of travel this rest of this year. I'm going to be in Brisbane at Reconnect in the beginning of September. I'm actually teaching my first live course, which is a UI design workshop. I believe there are some spots still available, so if anybody wants to sign up to that, if you're going to be in the area. Yeah, it's going to be a long flight to Australia, but I'm super excited to be there. And then I'm going to be speaking at Barcelona at FMCAT at the end of September. And then I'm going to be in Rome. I think Matt Navarre, you're also going to be there.
Yep.
And I'll be in Malmo as well at Engage U. So a lot of travel in
November.
my future. So I have the UX design workshop, which is basically a UX design course. It's an 8-module course. It was set up as weeks. So, when I run through this with training, I do training of teams as well. I've done Keologic, Goya, Keen8, a few others. And so we go through it once a week, but it's a self-paced course. So if you wanted to go through it and just do it on your own, you can do that as well. But it's 8 modules and it's basically a UX design course. So the UX part of what we've been talking about, we touched on a lot of the topics today with research and, how do you figure out what you should show people? How do you understand their business? Maybe you're using AI tools to do that research, maybe not. You're talking with your customers, and how are you actually setting up your project to make sure that you have a good result at the end? So there's that. And then the UI workshop, which I'm going to be teaching, I will eventually turn into an online course as well. And that's really sort of more the UI side of things. So, if I'm evaluating a UI, even maybe I am generating it somewhere or I'm inheriting it from somewhere, how do I even understand whether it is good UI or not? So a lot of people feel that they're not sure what they're supposed to be looking for and how to actually construct that. So that's what that's going to be about. I'm super excited about that. And so I'll be meeting a lot of the community, I think, through a lot of these things, which is always lots of fun.
And you can find that information at both hyperspacedatasolutions.com and fmdesignuniversity.com for more information on those courses. And oh my God, your frequent flyer miles are going to go crazy. Wow, that's amazing. And Odell, what do you got cooking? And by the way, please mention the podcast as well too, and what's coming next for you guys.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you, Alexis, for not mentioning that, because I don't really have much to plug other than I do a podcast with Alexis called Everyone Can Design. So go and find that. We're actually recording kind of our second season right now. We'll probably actually hop off of this call and go into another thing where we'll be recording some other episodes as we speak. So that's upcoming. Yeah, Everyone Can Design. Go and find that at your favorite podcast.
Gotta listen.
I added it to my feed once I learned about it. Yes, definitely.
Also, a link in the show notes to Everyone Can Design. And Odell, the band. Come on, man. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I play in an instrumental doom stoner metal band called Numerical Control Society. Hey, if you're, I don't know when this episode's going to come out, but if you're near Chicago, August 31st, we're playing at Reggie's Rock Club with Acid King, which will be fun. They're a San Francisco band. That's pretty awesome. So yeah, or find our albums on any of your streaming sites, Numerical Control Society.
I have your latest album. I'm also proud to say I have seen you perform live. And for those Odell fans out there, this is a must. So you got to check that out. Cool. And Navarre, your plugs as well too.
So I've just launched a new series of training classes. So there's a series of free classes that you can attend that have a really just kind of an introduction to the topic, and then I stick around for Q&A after. And then a paid class that's 2 hours long, that's interactive. So I don't do no lecture. It's all people in the class sharing their screen, learning a particular topic. Dashboard, JSON, optimizing for WAN performance. Those are the ones coming up. Those are $99. And then I stick around for half an hour, answer questions after that class. So Navarre.training is where you can learn about that.
Excellent. Well, I've been looking forward to. Oh, you know what? I'm finally not doing. I don't have any. I got all the conference stuff behind me. Actually, I will be doing some. I'm actually kind of completely spacing it, but check out isolutionsai.com. Where we have all sorts of videos and other content. You can link to some of the articles, including the Just Ask one that we talked about here, and kind of see my thoughts on how AI might work in conjunction with business applications. Otherwise, give me a follow on LinkedIn. I'm trying to stay very active there as well under just Cris Ippolite. That's Chris with no H. But other than that, I'll just keep moving forward on those platforms. And just got to say, I was really looking forward to this. I mean, shoot, I think the first text I shot off to Odell was like, I don't know, in May or something like that. So I've been counting the days, and this was great. Your insight is just so meaningful to me. Alexis, I really do. Again, I'm sincere when I say, when I see something with your name on it in the FileMaker community in particular, attached design, I trust it immediately and I dive right in. And I think everyone else should. And Matt, Odell, I miss you, man. I really enjoyed talking to you every day, and I'm so proud of where you're at right now. Even though we gave you a virtual birthday cake that says "We hope you fail" on your last day, that was not meaningful at all. I'm so proud of everything you're doing, and it's so cool. And I love hearing the two of you guys talk on the podcast as well too. So I hope everybody who hasn't already checked it out and somehow found ours goes and checks yours out too. So with that said, so happy to be joining you guys here today, and look forward to future conversations as well.
Good seeing you guys as well.
Thanks a lot, Chris and Matt.
Cheers, everyone.